The harsh summer sun beat down on Elijah Cooper's back as he guided the plow through the stubborn earth. At 17, his shoulders had already broadened from years of farm work, his skin tanned dark from endless days under the merciless Arizona Territory sun. The year was 1878, and the Cooper family had carved out a modest existence on the edge of Apache territory, 60 miles from the nearest town of Bisbee. "Pa says we'll have the south field ready by harvest if we keep this pace," Elijah's younger brother Daniel called out as he walked the edge of the field, canteen in hand. At 14, Daniel was already showing signs of the same sturdy build that marked the Cooper men. Elijah wiped sweat from his brow with a dusty forearm. "Bring that water here before you start planning the harvest." Their father, Thomas Cooper, watched from the edge of the property where he mended a broken fence post. A veteran of the Civil War, he had brought his family west after the conflict, determined to build something permanent away from the devastation he'd witnessed back east. Their mother, Sarah, had died of fever 3 winters ago, leaving Thomas to raise his sons alone on the unforgiving frontier. "Boys," Thomas called, his voice carrying across the field, "that's enough for today. Get the mule settled and come in for supper." As Elijah led the plow horse back to the small barn, he paused, the hair on the back of his neck rising. He scanned the distant hills and caught a glimpse of movement along the ridge. Apache scouts had been spotted increasingly in recent weeks, their presence a reminder that the Coopers lived on contested land. The uneasy peace between settlers and the various Apache bands had held for nearly a year, but rumors of renewed conflict circulated through the scattered homesteads. That evening, as they ate a simple meal of beans and cornbread, Thomas Cooper spoke of news from town. "Mr. Jenkins from the trading post says there's been skirmishes between the White Mountain and Chiricahua bands. Army's concerned it might spill over to settler territory. The Chiricahua ain't been friendly since that massacre at Yellow Creek," Elijah said, remembering the stories of a settlement 30 miles east that had been raided the previous spring. Thomas nodded gravely, "Which is why I don't want either of you riding out alone until things settle. The irrigation ditch needs work, but we'll do it together tomorrow." Later that night, as Elijah lay on his straw mattress, listening to Daniel's steady breathing from across the small room, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing in the land around them. He'd grown up with stories of Apache raids, but had personally known only wary distance between his family and the native inhabitants. The closest he'd come to an Apache was trading for a finely crafted knife at the Bisbee market 3 summers ago, a transaction conducted in silence with a warrior who had regarded him with impassive dark eyes. Dawn broke with a crimson splash across the eastern hills. Elijah rose early, determined to check the livestock before beginning work on the irrigation ditch. He pulled on his boots and slipped out of the house, his father's rifle in hand, a precaution that had become habit in recent months. The cattle grazed peacefully in the small pasture. But as Elijah approached the stream that marked the eastern boundary of their property, he noticed something unusual. Tracks in the mud, small, lighter than a man's. A child, perhaps. He followed them cautiously, rifle ready. The tracks led to a small thicket near the bend in the stream. Elijah approached slowly, then froze at the sound of labored breathing. Pushing aside the branches, he discovered a boy, no more than 8 years old, collapsed against a tree trunk. The child's dark skin and straight black hair marked him as Apache. But what caught Elijah's attention was the arrow protruding from the boy's shoulder and the trail of blood that had soaked through his deerskin clothing. Elijah hesitated only a moment before lowering his rifle. The boy's eyes fluttered open, wide with fear and pain, as he saw the white man standing over him. He tried to scramble away but fell back with a stifled cry. "Easy now," Elijah said softly, though he knew the boy likely wouldn't understand his words. "I'm not going to hurt you." He knelt slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. The boy watched him with wary, pain-filled eyes. The arrow was Apache-made, but Elijah knew enough about the local tribes to recognize that the fletching pattern was different from what he'd seen on the White Mountain Apache arrows. This boy had been shot by another tribe. Elijah's mind raced. Bringing an injured Apache child back to the farmhouse would infuriate his father, who had lost friends to native raids over the years. But leaving a wounded child to die went against everything his mother had taught him about compassion. "I'm going to help you," he said, reaching slowly toward the boy. The child flinched but was too weak to resist as Elijah carefully lifted him. The arrow shifted, drawing a pained gasp from the boy. "Easy," Elijah murmured. "I've got you." Instead of heading back to the farmhouse, Elijah carried the child to the old hunting cabin his father had built when they first arrived. Unused for years, it stood a quarter-mile from the main house, hidden by a stand of cottonwoods. It would provide shelter while he tended to the boy's wound, away from his father's disapproving eyes. The cabin was musty but intact. Elijah laid the child on a rough wooden table and examined the arrow wound more closely. The arrowhead had gone clean through the fleshy part of the shoulder, which was fortunate. Breaking off the shaft, he eased the arrow through, trying to be gentle despite the boy's stifled cries. Using water from his canteen and strips torn from his own shirt, Elijah cleaned and bound the wound as best he could. The boy remained conscious throughout, watching him with a mixture of fear and confusion. "You're safe here," Elijah said, offering the canteen. "Drink." The boy hesitated, then took a cautious sip. Elijah rummaged through the cabin's meager contents and found a forgotten jar of peach preserves. The boy accepted a spoonful, hunger momentarily overcoming suspicion. "I need to get back before they come looking for me," Elijah said, knowing the boy couldn't understand but feeling the need to explain anyway. "I'll return with food and better medicine." He made the boy as comfortable as possible on a pile of old blankets, then slipped back to the farmhouse. His father and brother were already at work on the irrigation ditch. "Where have you been?" Thomas asked, his tone sharp with concern. "We've been looking for you." "Checking the west fence line," Elijah lied, hating the deception but seeing no alternative. "Thought I saw tracks." Throughout the day, Elijah worked alongside his family, his mind constantly returning to the injured boy hidden in the cabin. When they broke for the midday meal, he managed to slip some bread and dried meat into his pocket. That evening, after his father and brother had gone to sleep, he gathered medical supplies from his mother's old trunk: tincture of willow bark for pain, honey for the wound, clean cloth for bandages, and made his way back to the cabin by moonlight. The boy was feverish but awake. He accepted the food and medicine without resistance, necessity overcoming distrust. As Elijah redressed the wound, he noticed an unusual pendant around the child's neck, a small piece of polished turquoise set in silver, marked with symbols he didn't recognize. "You're someone important, aren't you?" Elijah murmured, more to himself than to the boy. For 3 days, Elijah maintained his secret vigil, tending to the boy between his regular chores. The child's fever broke on the second night, and by the third day he was sitting up and taking solid food. Though they couldn't speak each other's language, a tentative trust had formed between them. The boy would watch Elijah with curious eyes, occasionally touching his own chest and saying what Elijah assumed was his name, Nakohe. On the morning of the 4th day, as Elijah approached the cabin with fresh supplies, he heard voices, harsh, urgent voices, speaking in the Apache tongue. He crouched behind a fallen log and watched as 4 warriors emerged from the trees, moving with purpose toward the cabin. They were not White Mountain Apache like the boy. Their paint and dress marked them as Chiricahua, from one of the more hostile bands that had refused reservation life. Elijah's heart raced. Had they tracked the boy here? Would they kill him for helping an enemy child? He thought of running back to warn his family, but knew he couldn't abandon Nakohe. The warriors reached the cabin door. One of them kicked it open, and moments later, Elijah heard a child's frightened cry. Without thinking, he grabbed a rock and hurled it into the brush away from his position. The diversion worked. 2 warriors immediately turned toward the sound, weapons ready. Taking advantage of their distraction, Elijah circled behind the cabin to the small window at the back. Through it, he could see Nakohe struggling in the grip of one warrior while another searched the cabin. The boy's eyes widened when he spotted Elijah, and he renewed his struggles, perhaps trying to create a diversion of his own. Elijah didn't hesitate. He raised his father's rifle and fired a shot into the air. The warriors inside the cabin froze momentarily, then burst into action. The one holding Nakohe dragged him toward the door, while the other raised his weapon toward the window. Elijah ducked as an arrow whistled over his head. "Run!" he shouted to Nakohe, though he knew the boy couldn't understand the word. He fired another shot, aiming low through the doorway, hoping to drive the warriors back without hitting the child. The plan worked partially. In the confusion, Nakohe broke free and darted away from his captors. But before the boy could reach the window, one of the warriors from outside had circled back. Elijah found himself staring down the barrel of an old army revolver, a trophy from some past raid. Everything happened at once. Nakohe cried out a warning. Elijah swung his rifle toward the new threat. A shot rang out, but not from the warrior's gun. From somewhere in the trees came the crack of a rifle, and the warrior with the revolver crumpled. More shots followed, and suddenly the air was filled with the sounds of battle. A hand grabbed Elijah's shoulder, and he spun to find Nakohe pulling urgently at him, gesturing toward the stream. Together they ran, the boy leading despite his injury, while behind them the gunfight continued. They splashed across the shallow water, scrambled up the far bank, and kept running until they reached a dense thicket of mesquite. Crouching in the brush, they watched as more Apache warriors, these with different markings than the Chiricahua, engaged their pursuers. Nakohe's people had come for him, but the rescue had brought battle dangerously close to the Cooper farm. "I need to warn my family," Elijah said, pointing toward his home. Nakohe seemed to understand. He nodded, then pointed to himself, and then to the warriors fighting nearby, his people. After a moment's hesitation, he removed the turquoise pendant from around his neck and pressed it into Elijah's hand, his small face solemn. "Nakohe," he said, touching the pendant, then touching Elijah's chest. Elijah. It was the first time the boy had spoken his name, clearly picked up from hearing Elijah refer to himself. The gesture seemed significant, a gift, perhaps even a pledge of friendship. Elijah nodded, carefully tucking the pendant into his pocket. "Stay safe." Nakohe. They parted ways, the boy slipping toward his people, while Elijah circled back toward the farm. But he never made it home. As he crossed an open stretch between two stands of trees, a war cry split the air. A Chiricahua warrior, separated from the main fighting, spotted him and gave chase. Elijah ran, but the warrior was faster. A crushing blow from behind sent him sprawling. As he rolled over, reaching desperately for his dropped rifle, he saw 3 more warriors approaching. The last thing he remembered was the butt of a rifle swinging toward his head, and then darkness. When Elijah regained consciousness, he was lying face down across a horse, his hands bound behind his back. His head throbbed with pain, and dried blood had crusted along his temple. Around him rode at least a dozen Chiricahua warriors, moving at a steady pace through terrain he didn't recognize. They had been traveling for hours. Judging by the position of the sun, now high overhead, fear gripped him as he thought of his family. Had the fighting reached the farm? Were his father and brother safe? And what of Nakohe? Had the boy reached his people, or had he been recaptured by these warriors? One of the Chiricahua noticed he was awake and barked something to the others. The party stopped, and rough hands dragged Elijah from the horse. His legs buckled as they forced him to stand, numb from hours of being slung over the saddle. A warrior who seemed to be the leader approached, studying Elijah with cold eyes. He wore a necklace of bear claws and carried an old cavalry saber in addition to traditional weapons. In broken English, he demanded, "Where Apache boy?" Elijah remained silent, unsure how much to reveal. Did they know Nakohe was the boy they sought, or were they just aware that he had helped some Apache child? The leader's face hardened at Elijah's silence. He barked an order, and 2 warriors forced Elijah to his knees. "You help enemy. You die slow unless you tell." "I don't know where he is now," Elijah said truthfully. "His people came for him." This caused a stir among the warriors. They conferred rapidly in their language, their tone urgent. The leader turned back to Elijah, his expression even more threatening. "What people? What marks they wear?" Elijah described the warriors who had engaged in the firefight, their paint, their dress, the particular pattern on their shields that he had glimpsed. This information seemed to confirm something the Chiricahua already suspected, for the leader nodded grimly. "Natsili people," he spat. "They hide boy from us. You help them, you enemy too." They bound Elijah's ankles, gave him a few sips of water, then hoisted him back onto the horse. The journey continued through increasingly rugged terrain, climbing into the mountains that marked the traditional stronghold of the Chiricahua bands that had refused reservation life. By nightfall, they reached a hidden canyon where a small encampment had been established. Unlike the permanent settlements Elijah had heard described, this seemed temporary, a war camp perhaps. Women tended fires while children peered curiously at the white captive. Warriors gathered around one large fire, where an older man dressed in a mixture of traditional garb and scavenged military items seemed to be holding council. Elijah was dragged before this gathering and forced to kneel once more. The leader of the war party spoke at length, occasionally gesturing toward Elijah. The older man, clearly a chief of some importance, listened impassively, then asked several questions that caused the warriors to debate among themselves. Finally, the chief addressed Elijah directly in halting English. "I am Delgadito. You know this name." Elijah had indeed heard the name. Delgadito was known as one of the more moderate Chiricahua leaders, who had nonetheless returned to the warpath after repeated broken treaties. "I know it," he answered. "Good. You know I can kill you quick or slow." Delgadito studied him with shrewd eyes. "But maybe you live. You tell truth. You help us. Maybe you go home." "What do you want to know?" Elijah asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Boy, you help. He wear special mark." "Silver with bluestone?" The turquoise pendant. Elijah's hand instinctively moved toward his pocket before he remembered his bonds. They were looking specifically for Nakohe, and the pendant was significant. Was the boy truly important then? A chief's son, perhaps? "I don't know what you mean," Elijah lied, unwilling to betray the child who had trusted him. A hard slap across his face was the immediate response. "You lie. Warriors see boy with you, see mark on him." Elijah tasted blood where his lip had split. "I helped an injured child. I don't know anything about him or his people." Delgadito conferred with his warriors again, then turned back to Elijah. "Tomorrow you talk, or tomorrow you die." He gestured, and Elijah was dragged to a small wickiup at the edge of the camp, where he was bound to a center post, a guard stationed outside. Alone in the darkness, Elijah assessed his situation with growing dread. These warriors believed he knew something important about Nakohe, something worth killing for. The boy was clearly more than just a random child. The pendant, the efforts to find him, the conflict between Apache bands, it all pointed to something significant. Exhaustion eventually overcame fear, and Elijah drifted into a restless sleep, filled with fragmented dreams of gunfire and pursuit. He woke to the sound of movement outside the wickiup. Not the heavy tread of warriors, but something lighter, more cautious. The entrance flap moved slightly, and a face appeared, an old woman, her wrinkled features set in a cautious expression. She put a finger to her lips, then slipped inside, carrying a small bundle. Moving silently, she examined the ropes binding Elijah to the post, then produced a small knife from her clothing. "Why are you helping me?" Elijah whispered as she began sawing at his bonds. The old woman paused, studying his face in the dim light filtering through the wickiup covering. In heavily accented English, she said, "Long ago, white doctor saved my grandson when soldiers shoot him. Not all white men bad. Not all Chiricahua want war." As the ropes fell away, she pressed the bundle into his hands, a water skin, some dried meat, and a small deerskin pouch. "Go west," she whispered. "To high rocks. Find Natsili people. Tell them grandmother sits in corner sends you. Show them this." She tapped the pouch. Elijah opened it and found a small clay pipe, decorated with distinctive markings. "What does it mean?" "Peace pipe, from time before war. Natsili, remember." She peered outside, then motioned for him to follow. "Guard sleeping now. I put medicine in his water. You go quick." The camp was quiet, most of its inhabitants asleep. The old woman led Elijah to the edge of the canyon where the horses were kept. She pointed to a small, dun-colored mare. "Take this one, quiet feet." Elijah hesitated. "They'll punish you for helping me." She shook her head. "I am old. They think I am crazy. Go now, find Natsili. Tell them Delgadito plans war party against White Eye's ranch tomorrow. Many will die if no one stops them. The news sent a chill through Elijah. His family was in danger. My father, my brother, go to Natsili, the old woman insisted. Only they can stop Delgadito now. White soldiers too far. With her help, Elijah quietly bridled the mare, not bothering with a saddle. As he prepared to mount, the old woman pressed something else into his hand, a small leather bag. Medicine, she explained. For pain, for strength. You need. Elijah thanked her, touched by her kindness in the midst of so much danger. As he rode away from the camp, guiding the mare carefully through the darkness, he wondered about the complex web of alliances and enmities he had stumbled into. The Chiricahua and these Natsili people were clearly enemies, with Nakohe somehow at the center of their conflict. And now his own family was threatened as well. He rode through the night, guided by the stars and the old woman's directions, heading west toward the high rocks she had mentioned. The terrain was challenging, especially in darkness, but the mare was sure-footed and seemed to know the paths. By dawn, he had put considerable distance between himself and the Chiricahua camp. As the sun rose, Elijah found himself in a landscape of towering rock formations and deep, narrow canyons. He dismounted to rest the horse and took stock of his situation. His head still throbbed where he'd been struck, and his empty stomach reminded him that he'd had almost nothing to eat for a day. He chewed some of the dried meat the old woman had provided and drank sparingly from the water skin. The sound of water drew him to a small spring seeping from the base of a cliff. As he refilled the water skin, he heard the unmistakable click of a weapon being cocked. Freezing in place, he slowly raised his hands. "Don't move, White Eyes," came a voice in accented but clear English. Elijah remained still as several figures emerged from the rocks around him. They were Apache warriors, their paint and dress matching those of the men who had come for Nakohe. The Natsili. "I'm not here to fight," Elijah said carefully. "I'm looking for the Natsili people. Grandmother sits in corner sent me." This caused a stir among the warriors. One of them, older than the others and wearing a headband with a distinctive pattern, stepped forward. "You speak of our ally among Delgadito's band. Why would she send a White Eyes to us?" Slowly, Elijah reached for the pouch containing the peace pipe. "She gave me this to show you, and a message. Delgadito plans to attack a White Eyes ranch tomorrow, my home." The older warrior took the pipe, examining it carefully. His expression remained unreadable, but he nodded slightly. "This is old medicine. Strong peace talk." He studied Elijah's face. "Why does grandmother help you?" "I helped an Apache boy," Elijah explained. "He was wounded, with an arrow from Chiricahua warriors. I hid him and treated his wound. His name was Nakohe." The name sent a visible shock through the group. The leader barked quick orders, and two warriors moved to seize Elijah's arms. "What have you done with the son of our chief?" the leader demanded, his previous composure replaced by fierce intensity. "Nothing. I helped him," Elijah protested. "When his people came, your people, I think, I tried to return to my farm to warn my family. But Delgadito's warriors captured me." The leader studied him suspiciously. "How do we know you speak truth?" Elijah remembered the pendant. "Nakohe gave me something before we parted." Carefully, he reached into his pocket and produced the turquoise pendant. "This, he seemed to want me to have it." The sight of the pendant caused an immediate reaction. The warriors conferred urgently, and several made gestures that seemed protective or reverential toward the small object. "Where did you last see Nakohe?" the leader asked, his tone now more measured. Elijah described the location near the stream, the battle between the two Apache groups, and how he had last seen Nakohe heading toward his own people while Elijah tried to reach his farm. After a long, tense silence, the leader nodded. "We will take you to our camp. Chief Natsili will decide your fate." They bound Elijah's hands, though less roughly than the Chiricahua had done, and led him and the mare deeper into the maze of canyons. After an hour's journey, they reached a well-hidden encampment nestled between high rock walls. Unlike Delgadito's war camp, this seemed more permanent, with carefully constructed wickiups and ramadas, drying racks for meat and hides, and areas for food preparation. As they entered the camp, Elijah noticed something that made his heart leap. Sitting near one of the fires, his wounded shoulder now properly bandaged, was Nakohe. The boy's eyes widened when he saw Elijah, and he jumped to his feet, calling out excitedly. An imposing man emerged from the largest wickiup, tall for an Apache, with a dignified bearing and elaborate decoration on his buckskin shirt that marked him as a man of importance. Nakohe ran to this man, speaking rapidly and gesturing toward Elijah. The man, clearly Chief Natsili, listened to the boy, his expression grave. He approached Elijah, studying him with penetrating dark eyes. "My son says you saved his life," he said in perfect English, surprising Elijah. "He says you treated his wound and hid him from Delgadito's scouts." "I did," Elijah confirmed. "I didn't know who he was. I just couldn't leave a wounded child to die." Natsili nodded slowly. Many White Eyes would have, or worse. He gestured, and Elijah's bonds were cut. "You are welcome in our camp, Elijah Cooper. My son has spoken your name many times since he returned." Relief flooded through Elijah. "Thank you. But I must warn you. Delgadito plans to attack my family's farm tomorrow. I need to get back to them." Natsili's expression hardened. "Delgadito grows bold. He thinks that by killing Nakohe, he can force our band to join his war against the White Eyes." "Why Nakohe?" Elijah asked, still confused about the boy's importance. "My son carries a special medicine," Natsili explained, touching the pendant that now hung once more around Nakohe's neck. "It was given to him at birth by a powerful medicine man who saw that Nakohe would one day bring peace between our peoples. Delgadito and others like him fear this prophecy. They prefer war." Elijah processed this information. "So the attack on my farm, it's partly because I helped Nakohe." "Partly," Natsili confirmed, "but also because Delgadito has lost many warriors recently. He needs to show strength. Your farm is isolated." "An easy target." "I have to warn them," Elijah insisted. Natsili nodded. "You will, but not alone." He turned to the leader of the warriors who had found Elijah. "Prepare 20 men. We ride to the Cooper farm before sundown." The warrior acknowledged the order and hurried away. Natsili turned back to Elijah. "Rest now. Eat. We will leave soon." Nakohe approached, carrying a bowl of stew, which he offered to Elijah with a shy smile. As Elijah ate the nourishing meal, the boy sat beside him, occasionally touching the pendant and then pointing to Elijah, as if confirming some connection between them. When Natsili returned, he carried something wrapped in soft buckskin. "My son wishes you to have this," he said, unwrapping the package to reveal a beautifully crafted knife with a handle of polished bone. "He says it is to replace the one you used to cut the arrow from his shoulder." Elijah accepted the gift with appropriate solemnity. "Thank him for me, it's beautiful work." Natsili translated, and Nakohe beamed with pride. Then the chief grew serious again. "There is something you should know, Elijah Cooper. The medicine man who blessed Nakohe at birth spoke of a White Eyes youth who would save him from death and become a bridge between our worlds. My son believes you are this person." Elijah shifted uncomfortably. "I'm just a farmer's son. I don't know anything about being a bridge." "Perhaps," Natsili said with a slight smile, "but you have already begun the work by saving one who may one day lead our people. Come now. We must reach your farm before Delgadito's warriors." They rode hard through the afternoon. Elijah leading the way. Once they reached terrain he recognized. The 20 warriors moved with remarkable stealth, leaving minimal sign of their passage. Nakohe had insisted on coming as well, riding double with one of the younger warriors. As they approached the Cooper farm from the east, Elijah's anxiety grew. The building stood quiet in the late afternoon sun, seemingly undisturbed. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, a normal sight that nonetheless filled him with relief. They were still there, still safe. Natsili signaled for his warriors to remain hidden in the tree line while he and Elijah approached the house. "Your father may shoot before he asks questions if he sees 20 Apache warriors riding toward his home," the chief observed dryly. As they rode into the yard, the front door burst open. Thomas Cooper emerged with his rifle raised, his face a mask of shock and disbelief at the sight of his son riding alongside an Apache chief. "Pa, don't shoot," Elijah called out. "He's here to help." Daniel appeared behind their father, his own rifle ready, but his expression confused. "Elijah? We thought you were dead." Elijah dismounted quickly. "Pa, this is Chief Natsili of the White Mountain Apache. He and his warriors helped me escape from Chiricahua, who captured me. The Chiricahua are planning to attack our farm tomorrow." Thomas Cooper kept his rifle trained on Natsili, his expression suspicious. "Why would one Apache band warn us about another?" Natsili remained mounted, his posture dignified. "Because not all Apache want war with White Eyes, because your son saved my son's life. And because Delgadito threatens all who seek peace, Apache and White Eyes alike." Slowly, Thomas lowered his rifle. "Your son?" At a signal from Natsili, the young warrior rode forward with Nakohe. The boy slid down from the horse and stood proudly beside his father. Recognition dawned on Thomas's face as he looked at the child's bandaged shoulder. "The missing Apache boy the army's been asking about. You found him, didn't you, Elijah? That's why you've been sneaking off." Elijah nodded. "He was wounded, Pa. I couldn't just leave him." Thomas Cooper was silent for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then he sighed heavily. "Sarah always said you had too much of her heart in you." He turned to Natsili. "You'd better come inside, Chief. We have plans to make if we're going to defend this place." As they gathered around the rough wooden table in the Cooper kitchen, an unlikely alliance took shape. Thomas, initially reluctant, listened as Natsili outlined what they knew of Delgadito's strength and likely approach. The Cooper farm, situated as it was between a stream and rocky hills, could be defended if they positioned warriors carefully. "The army patrol won't be through this area for another 5 days, Thomas said. "We're on our own." "Not on your own," Natsili corrected. "My warriors are skilled fighters, and they know Delgadito's methods." Through the evening they prepared for the coming attack. Natsili's warriors constructed hidden positions around the property, while the Coopers gathered ammunition and reinforced the house. Nakohe stayed close to Elijah, watching with solemn eyes as the preparations continued. As night fell, Elijah found himself sitting on the porch steps beside the Apache boy. Despite the language barrier, they had developed a way of communicating through gestures and expressions. Nakohe touched his bandaged shoulder, then placed his hand over his heart, looking at Elijah with gratitude. "You're welcome," Elijah said softly. "I'm glad you made it back to your people." From the doorway, Thomas Cooper watched this interaction with a troubled expression. When Nakohe was called away by one of the warriors, Thomas sat heavily beside his son. "Your mother would be proud of what you did," he said after a long silence. "Me, I'm still figuring out how I feel about my son hiding an Apache child and then bringing 20 warriors to our doorstep." "I didn't have much choice, Pa," Elijah said, "and they're here to help us." Thomas nodded slowly. "I know. Strange times make for strange alliances." He placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "When this is over, if we survive it, things will change. The army won't look kindly on us harboring Apache, even friendly ones." "So what do we do?" "I don't know yet, son. Let's get through tomorrow first." Dawn broke with tense anticipation. Natsili's scouts reported movement to the south, Delgadito's war party approaching cautiously, perhaps 25 warriors strong. They had expected an undefended farm, not a prepared defense with Apache allies. Elijah, positioned with Daniel in the barn loft, with clear lines of sight to the southern approach, felt his heart racing. This wasn't the life he had imagined, caught between rival Apache bands, defending his home alongside warriors who, in other circumstances, might have been enemies. The first attack came just after sunrise, a probing effort by a small group of Chiricahua that was quickly driven back by fire from Natsili's hidden warriors. Delgadito was testing their strength, trying to determine what he faced. The main assault began an hour later, a coordinated rush from multiple directions. Gunfire erupted across the property as defenders met attackers. From his position, Elijah could see Natsili's warriors moving with disciplined precision, falling back when pressed, then counter-attacking from new positions. The battle raged through the morning, neither side gaining a clear advantage. The Cooper house took fire, and Daniel was grazed by a bullet that splintered the barn wall. By midday, the attacks had tapered off, Delgadito's forces pulling back to regroup. During this lull, Elijah made his way to the house, where his father and Natsili were conferring. Both men looked grim. "They'll wait for nightfall," Natsili was saying, "then try to burn us out." Thomas nodded in agreement. "We've lost 3 positions already. They're working their way closer to the house." "What about the army patrol?" Elijah asked. "Could we get word to them somehow?" "Too far," his father replied, "and we can't spare anyone to make the ride." Nakohe, who had been kept safely in the root cellar during the fighting, emerged as Elijah entered. The boy spoke urgently to his father, gesturing toward the hills to the east. Natsili listened, then turned to the Coopers. "My son reminds me of something. There is a signal fire location on the eastern ridge. It has been used by our people for generations to call for help. If we could light it, other bands of our tribe who camp in the next valley might see it and come." "That ridge is exposed," Thomas objected. "Anyone trying to reach it would be seen." "Not if they went by the old game trail through the rocks," Elijah said. "It's narrow, but a good rider on a small horse could make it without being spotted from this side." Natsili and Thomas exchanged glances. "A small rider," Natsili said softly, looking at his son. "No," Thomas said immediately. "He's just a boy. A boy who knows the signal, who can ride like he was born on a horse, and who is small enough to make it through that trail without being seen," Natsili countered. "None of my warriors could do it undetected." "I'll go with him," Elijah offered. "I know that trail better than anyone." Thomas Cooper's face showed the struggle within him, the risk to his son against the desperate need for reinforcements. Finally, he nodded once, sharply. "Go, but be careful, both of you." While the defenders prepared for the next assault, Elijah and Nakohe slipped out the back of the house. They took the dun-colored mare that had carried Elijah from the Chiricahua camp, small and nimble enough for the narrow trail. Elijah lifted Nakohe onto the horse's back, then mounted behind him. "We need to be quick and quiet," he murmured, though he knew the boy couldn't understand his words. But Nakohe nodded anyway, seeming to grasp the need for stealth. They made their way to the base of the ridge, where the old game trail began its winding path up through the rocks. The mare picked her way carefully, her unshod hooves making little sound on the stony path. Above them, the ridge rose steeply, the signal point still out of sight around the curve of the hillside. Halfway up, they heard shouts from below. They had been spotted. Gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off rocks near them. Elijah urged the mare faster, risking the steeper sections of trail at a dangerous pace. "Hold on," he called to Nakohe as they rounded a sharp bend. The boy clung tightly to the horse's mane, his small body tense, but his face determined. They reached the signal point, a flat area near the top of the ridge where generations of Apache had built and maintained a stone-lined fire pit. Dry wood was stacked nearby, protected under a rock overhang from the elements. Working quickly, they built up the fire. Nakohe produced a small fire-starting kit from a pouch at his waist, and soon flames were licking at the dry wood. The boy added specific branches and leaves that created a thick, white smoke, part of the signal pattern that would be recognized by his people. Below, they could see movement, as several Chiricahua warriors attempted to climb the trail after them. Elijah grabbed his rifle, prepared to defend their position. "We need to hold them off until the signal is seen," he told Nakohe, gesturing to make his meaning clear. The boy nodded, then unexpectedly produced a small bow that had been strapped to his back under his shirt. Though it was a child's weapon, in skilled hands it could still be deadly at close range. For nearly an hour they held the ridgetop, Elijah's rifle keeping the approaching warriors pinned down on the narrow trail where only 1 or 2 could advance at a time. Nakohe maintained the signal fire, carefully feeding it to produce the specific smoke pattern needed. Then, just as their situation was growing desperate, with ammunition running low and more warriors gathering at the base of the trail, Nakohe gave a cry of excitement. He pointed to the distant valley to the east. where dust clouds signaled riders approaching at speed, many riders. "They've seen it," Elijah said with relief. "Your people are coming." They held their position until they could confirm that the approaching riders were indeed Apache allies. Then, with the Chiricahua on the trail distracted by the new threat, they mounted the mare and made their way down a different path on the far side of the ridge, circling back toward the farm. They arrived to find the battle turning. The reinforcements, nearly 40 warriors from allied Apache bands, had struck Delgadito's forces from behind, catching them in a vice between the new arrivals and the farm's defenders. The fighting was fierce but brief, ending with Delgadito himself being captured, while trying to rally his scattered warriors for a final stand. In the aftermath, as the sun set over the blood-soaked earth around the Cooper farm, an extraordinary council took place. Thomas Cooper, still coming to terms with the day's events, opened his home to the Apache leaders who had fought alongside him. Delgadito, bound but defiant, was brought before this mixed gathering of white settlers and Apache chiefs. Natsili spoke first, addressing Delgadito in their shared language, but then translating for the Coopers. "You sought to kill my son, to prevent the peace he will bring. You have failed." Delgadito spat on the ground. "Peace with White Eyes brings only slow death on reservations. Better to die fighting." "Not all White Eyes are enemies," Natsili responded, gesturing to the Coopers. "This family protected my son. The father opened his home to our warriors." The elder son risked his life twice for Nakohe. The leader of the reinforcements, a weathered man introduced as Chief Beshkai, studied Elijah with interest. "The one from the prophecy?" "So it seems," Natsili agreed. The medicine man spoke of a young White Eyes with the heart of an Apache who would help the boy survive when enemies sought his life. Thomas Cooper cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I don't know anything about prophecies, but I know we couldn't have survived today without your help, and I know my son did what his mother would have wanted, showing kindness to a child who needed it, regardless of where that child came from." Beshkai nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps there is wisdom in this." "Too much blood has been spilled between our peoples." Delgadito remained unswayed. "The army will come. They will not understand this alliance. They will punish all Apache, friendly or not." This uncomfortable truth hung in the air. Finally, Thomas Cooper spoke again. "What if they found that Delgadito's band attacked my farm and was driven off by my family alone? What if no other Apache were involved?" Natsili considered this. "You would lie to protect us?" "I would tell a version of the truth that protects those who helped us," Thomas replied. "We can say Delgadito escaped in the fighting. By the time the army investigates, your people can be far from here." The Apache chiefs conferred among themselves. Then Natsili turned to Delgadito. "You will be taken far from here, to the southern bands. You will not return to these lands while Nakohe lives. This is the judgment of the council." Despite his defeated position, Delgadito maintained his dignity. "I go, but others will continue to fight. The White Eyes' hunger for our land will not end." "Perhaps not," Natsili acknowledged. "But today, at least, we have found that some bridges can be built between our worlds." He looked at Elijah as he said this, his expression both grateful and speculative. As the council dispersed, and preparations were made for the various Apache bands to depart before dawn, Nakohe sought out Elijah one last time. The boy carried a small object wrapped in soft leather, which he presented to Elijah with formal gravity. Unwrapping it, Elijah found a miniature bow and arrow, expertly crafted to scale. A traditional Apache gift from one warrior to another, Natsili explained as he joined them. "My son wishes you to have this to remember him," the chief said, "and to remind you of the bridge you have begun to build." Elijah accepted the gift with appropriate seriousness. "Tell him I'll keep it always, and that I hope someday when he's grown our paths will cross again." After Natsili translated this, Nakohe smiled and touched the turquoise pendant at his neck. He spoke a few words in his language, which his father translated. "He says the pendant told him you were a true friend from the moment he saw you. He says when he becomes chief one day, he will remember the Cooper family and keep them safe." The boy reached out and Elijah clasped his small hand. No further words were needed between them. Their shared ordeal had forged a connection that transcended language and the divisions between their peoples. By morning, the Apache were gone, all except for a small group of bodies they had not been able to retrieve in the fighting, which would support the Cooper's story about driving off Delgadito's attack alone. Thomas Cooper stood on the porch of his damaged home, surveying the bullet-scarred buildings and churned earth of the yard. "It'll take months to repair everything," he said as Elijah joined him, "and longer to make sense of what happened here." "Do you think the army will believe our story?" Elijah asked. Thomas shrugged. "They'll believe what's convenient for them to believe. A settler family fighting off hostiles fits their narrative better than Apache bands helping white farmers." "What about Natsili's prophecy?" "About me being some kind of bridge." His father was silent for a long moment. "I don't know about prophecies, son, but I know your mother would say that showing kindness in a world full of hatred is never wasted. Maybe that's all the bridge we need to build, one act of compassion at a time." As they turned to begin the work of rebuilding, Elijah's hand went to his pocket, where Nakohe's gift rested. Whatever the future held between their peoples, he had glimpsed a possibility that few others had seen, the chance for understanding across the divide of culture and conflict. It was a small beginning, perhaps, but in a land where hatred and bloodshed had become the expected way, even small beginnings carried the seed of hope. In the distance, a thin spiral of smoke rose from the hills, a final signal from Natsili's band as they moved toward their summer grounds. Elijah raised his hand in farewell, knowing that somewhere among those distant riders, a small boy with a turquoise pendant was perhaps looking back toward the Cooper farm, carrying with him a similar seed of possibility for the future.